All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday, November the 17th, week 11, Vancouver, Earth. Okay. So yesterday we were watching a bit of a documentary on the Cold War, and we saw some things in it which I will review. I'm going to say good morning to a few people here, and also I'll ask you, I know a couple people had some issues accessing the video. Did everyone have issues, or was it just a few people? Could you just let me know in the live chat here, just so I know for sure? Okay, so Michaela's here. Good morning, Michaela. And Mike's here. Good morning. And Ayushi's here. Good morning, Ayushi. Ananda's here. Good morning, Ananda. Helen is here. Good morning, Helen. Kevin's here. Hi, Kevin. Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil. Shania is here. Good morning, or good evening, Shania. Ashley's here. Good morning, Ashley. And John is here. Good morning. And Ty is here. Good morning. And John is also here. Good morning to you. Okay, so some people were able to access it, it looks like. So Ayushi says yes. So does Michaela. Okay. Interesting. I wonder why. Good morning. I wonder why some people can access it and others, and others cannot. Okay. Well, I guess we'll see how that goes. Okay. Yesterday, we started, or where were we? We're talking about the Cold War, right? The face-off between the US and the Soviet Union for decades defines the second half of the 20th century, divides Europe in half into a Soviet sphere of influence and into a Western sphere of influence. And of course, that sort of thing is going to spill over into the rest of the world, right? Because basically, as time goes on, the rest of the world is going to have to kind of choose a side, right? So are you with the Soviets or are you with the Americans? And some countries will try to stay neutral and they'll try to stay out of things, but really everyone will kind of get caught up in, which side are you on sort of thing. But of course, where this opposition is kind of most heated at the moment anyway, or at the beginning of the Cold War, is certainly in Europe and in Germany, right? This is where these two powers are kind of neighbors. They're cuddled up side by side. Neither is really too happy about that idea, or at least Stalin isn't too happy about that idea. And so we see that, sorry, I'm just gonna jump ahead. I've got some things here. We saw that Germany was kind of partitioned this way because after the war, the Allies couldn't seem to agree on what to do with it, right? And so obviously these two sides have different priorities and ideologies and approaches, and so they can't decide what to do with Germany, and so they wind up splitting it down the center, and each power kind of does with their half what they want to do, which isn't really a compromise, but that's kind of what happens, right? I'm just going to jump here. I'm going to jump here. We said that the Truman Doctrine was important, of course, because this is the beginning of the US commitment to contain the Soviet Union and contain communism, right? And we said it's a big change for them. They were isolationist in the past, and now they're going to step up and kind of be everywhere, in everyone's face all the time, which again is kind of more the America that we're used to, right? The Americans are kind of everywhere, they're involved in everything, and this is the start of it as they step forward to try to contain Joseph Stalin's USSR, right? So yeah, he says that the United States should, there it is, should support free peoples who are resisting subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures, right? So again, he's kind of hiding it in the language, but he's basically saying, countries where communists are trying to take over, we will be there to help these free people resist that force, right? We heard about the Marshall Plan, and we read about it, and we saw it in the video, where the US pumps billions and billions of dollars into Western Europe to try to revive their economies, right? And the rationale here is that when unemployment is high and the infrastructure is destroyed and there's no hope, communism looks fantastic, right? Because everybody will the government will take care of everyone, right? Everyone will have what they need. And so that's a very kind of alluring promise. And so in order to sort of fight communism, the Americans fight it with money. And so they throw a lot of money at Europe. But it does work, right? These European economies do revive. And of course, keep in mind that the Marshall Plan also offers aid to the Soviet Union and to the Soviet countries in the Soviet sphere. They all say, thanks, we're good. Or Stalin says, thanks, we're good for them. We talked about the Berlin blockade yesterday, where Stalin tries to get the Western powers out of Berlin by cutting off rail and road access. The Americans say, haha, nice try, Stalin, and they airdrop everything they need into Berlin for pretty much a full year, right? Which is an incredible commitment. I don't know what the price tag for that is, but it must have been massive. But again, they're committed to it, right? Because as soon as they back down on this, what's going to happen next, right? And you heard, I think it was the Soviet foreign minister in the documentary yesterday, and he said, what did he say? He said, what happens to Berlin happens to Germany, and what happens to Germany happens to Europe, right? So I think that the Soviets understood that, but I think the Western powers understood it as well. And so Berlin becomes kind of the focal point where all this pressure is centered, right? And so nobody will back down. And again, this gets resolved peacefully, right? Of course, these. We'll see. We'll see. Right. So. Yeah. So these people's lives hang in the balance, of course, but at least it's a nonviolent conflict, right? And there's a few of these. There's a few of these kind of nonviolent conflicts, like the Soviets kind of refusing to leave Iran, and the Americans kind of persuade them to leave. And then there's Stalin's kind of interest in Turkey, and the Americans show up and just kind of remind them that, hey, this is our backyard, not your backyard, so take a hike, and he kind of does. And here in the Berlin blockade, Stalin tries to, in a non-violent way, tries to get the Western powers out. The Western powers respond also in a non-violent way. And so you can see these two are kind of like testing each other early in the Cold War, right? And so again, there's no warfare or violence, but that will change with the Korean War by 1950, right? Okay, so we watched part of that video yesterday. We saw. Oh, that's interesting. Hang on a sec. Technical difficulty. In the video we saw, did anything kind of stand out to you in the video when we were watching it? Things that were different or interesting or? Right, we talked about that. We talked about the fact that it was, sorry, we talked about the fact that it was, it's a documentary, but it's very clearly made for an American audience, right? And so you can kind of, there we go, that's the one I'm looking for. You can kind of see that in some of the language that they use, right? In terms of who they identify as the enemy, right? That's an obvious one. But then there's lots of other things about, you can see themselves kind of patting themselves on the back, if you will, right? When the Marshall Plan is in place, and American funds are going to, buy this for Germany, or not, this for Germany, and this for France, and this for Denmark, and you can kind of see themselves patting themselves on the back a little bit.
They really deserve a pat on the back.
I'm definitely, they do. Like it's not an unwarranted pat on the back. I'm definitely not saying that, but they are. They're patting each other. They're patting themselves on the back, right?
So when was this documentary filmed?
Ooh, I don't know exactly. I don't know the year. I don't know the year.
The 2000s, 1990s.
It's possible. It's possible it's from the 1990s.
There's no date.
What's that?
There's no unpublished date.
Um,
Like the documentary where you found it.
well, I didn't. I borrowed it from YouTube, and so I don't. And actually, when I went back to find it on YouTube, I couldn't find it again. So I don't know if it was taken down or not. So I have I have a electronic copy of that, but I don't know. I don't know what the year of it is. And maybe when we start reading here, I'll. Actually, I don't even know what it's called. But I'll try to figure out when it was made. I'm guessing you're right. Probably like mid to late 90s, maybe. It's kind of it's what it feels like to me. What?
Too early.
Huh?
The 90s is too early, right? The video,
It's too early for what?
the video thing.
To be published.
Yeah.
The 1990s? No. Yeah, and actually, yeah, where does this movie go to? I think it ends with the fall of the Soviet Union. So it's probably, yeah, mid 90s is probably right. Like after that big event happened, they decided to make a documentary sort of thing. So yeah, maybe mid to late 90s. Right. So right. So again, there's a little bit of bias. It's very clearly made for an American audience. That's okay, right? As long as things are made for audiences, we know that about sources. Is this documentary a primary source or a secondary one? Secondary source. Yeah. Are there primary sources in it? Yeah, all kinds of them, right? We've got video from the time, those are all primary sources. We've got some written text from the time, which they've gotten actors to read, but still the original text is a primary source, right? So we've got a couple of primary sources woven into this secondary source. It's told from a certain perspective. It's told from the Western or the American perspective, and it's a story for Americans, right? So this is kind of Americans' understanding of the Cold War and what it was like, and as I say, you can see it in terms of who they identify as the good guy and the bad guy. You can see it when they're patting themselves on the back for a job well done, which again is perhaps warranted, but they're still doing it, right? And so they're not really patting the Soviets on the back for anything. Not that they really should, but yeah, there might be a little bit of evident bias in this, which is, again, okay. Everything is biased to some degree. We just have to be able to identify what that bias is, right? Okay, so I have a little bit for you to read, and it is here. I'm just going to check. I don't think that's in Teams yet, but I'm just going to double check for sure. Just going to double check for sure. And if it's not there, of course, I will put it into there immediately.
From the human arts.
I think so. Is that 183? Is that what I have there?
Yeah, the thing before
180. Yes. New alliances, NATO, Attainment, Korean War. Yep. Yep, that's what I want. So, okay. All right, so online people, that section isn't in Microsoft Teams yet, so just give me 1 minute and I'll have it there for you. And in-person people, you can start reading, okay? Okay, online people, your reading should be in Microsoft Teams for you now. maybe just another minute or two, and then we'll talk, okay? Okay, ready, shreddies? Ready? Okay. So, lots going on here, but some of this we heard about in the documentary yesterday, so maybe it's not so much. Let's talk about NATO. What's this NATO thing? North Armenian. What's that? Okay, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And what does NATO do? What's it for?
Well, it was made up to stand against the Soviets.
Right. How does NATO kind of start off? How does it get going?
So it was first attacked, I don't know what they call it, with like 5 countries.
Mm-hmm.
France, Britain, yeah, they signed a pact to like Belgium, France, Luxembourg, the Brussels. You get the name.
The Brussels sprouts, the Brussels Pact, right?
Yeah.
I love Brussels sprouts. Anyway, so yeah, the Brussels Pact, right? And so these kind of there's France and some of these smaller European countries. Again, they're looking over at the Soviet Union. They're feeling just a little nervous about what's going on over there, right? And they decide, hey, let's ally together so that we have mutual defense, right? If Stalin tries to move in on one of us, he'll have to deal with all of us, right? So these countries kind of get together in this Brussels Pact, and then a little bit later on, other countries will join as well, right? So the US, probably most importantly, Canada, not that importantly, but it's nice. And so a number of other countries will join together to serve as kind of a deterrent to Stalin, right? Because we see Stalin being a little bit aggressive in the Berlin blockade, right? He wants Western powers out of Berlin, and then who knows what he wants next, right? And so again, some of these smaller European countries get nervous. They decide to create a defensive alliance, and later other countries will join in, most notably the US, and create NATO, right? Which still exists, yeah. Even though, its original reason for being is, well, maybe it's not gone. Maybe it's not gone. Maybe, or maybe Russia. I don't know. I don't, to be honest, I don't really know exactly what NATO sees as its mandate currently. Like in 1950 or so, it was pretty clear what they were, what their mandate is, but.
Now they're looking for still a mutual defense pact, like they attack one of them, they attack all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, what fuel would you
Like, what if Denmark and France decided to duke it out? I don't know. Awkward and confusing. You'd have to choose sides. I don't know. I don't know how that would work. Right. So, but NATO gets created, and what does Joseph Stalin go ahead and do in response? Yeah, he'll create Warsaw Pact, right? And so, not that these other countries have much of a choice, but they are in a defensive alliance with the Soviet Union as well. Again, it's kind of, it's kind of for show because, of course, these countries at this point do whatever Stalin tells them to do anyway, for the most part. And so, it's not much of an alliance, but still, it's another, it's another kind of allied group of countries opposing the West, right? So now we have kind of a formal, as they mentioned in the textbook, these spheres of influence are political, but they're also economic, and now they're military as well, right? So these spheres have been consolidated into, real opposing sides. What did I ask you next? 12? 14? Let me see. When does Spain join NATO? I'm not quite sure. Spain was, I know they're neutral in the Second World War.
There was another term when you're technically neutral, but you're leaning to one side. Because they leaned to the Nazi side. They didn't send volunteers to fight on the Eastern Front.
Right. I don't know. It's possible they don't join NATO for quite some time, right? Because Franco's kind of a fascist, and I don't know how interested he is in kind of global affairs. So I don't know. It might actually be quite a while before Spain joins, but I don't know. I don't know offhand. We can Google it when we have a minute, or you can Google it now if you want. Let's see. Let's look at number 14 here. Oh yes, Tito, our good friend Tito. Who's Tito? He's a Yugoslavian person. Right. So he becomes the leader of Yugoslavia at the end of World War II. Right. What do we know about him in World War II? What's his role? Yeah, Stalin does hate him. I kind of like him for that reason. Not that I'm into communist dictators, but as far as communist dictators go, I can get behind some of what Tito does.
Okay, 1992, 30th of May, like after the Union was gone.
That makes sense to me.
That's pointless.
That makes sense to me. Right. So Tito's a general in the Yugoslavian army during the Second World War. What do we know about Yugoslavia and its liberation from the Nazis? Yeah, so basically the Yugoslavians kick the Nazis out themselves, right? So most of other European nations get help from the Allied forces who come in and liberate them, or in Eastern Europe, the Red Army, the Soviet forces liberate them. But here in Yugoslavia, they basically do it themselves. Right? They basically kick the Nazis out on their own, and so that makes Tito he's a hero, right? This guy's awesome, right? And so he uses that kind of prestige and power to maneuver himself into being the dictator of Yugoslavia, the leader of Yugoslavia. And he's a bit of a communist too, right? So he sets up kind of a communist dictatorship in Yugoslavia, but separate from the USSR, right? And they mention in the text that the USSR actually is more of a hindrance during the war than a help, and they sort of brutalize some Yugoslavians, so the Yugoslavians don't really like the Russians anyway. And so Tito's the guy, right? And so how is he able to resist Stalin? Because lots of these other countries like Romania and Bulgaria and Poland and Czechoslovakia, they are all in the tight iron grip of Stalin, right? And yet Tito manages not to have that happen to him. But what does he do, or how does he do that?
He
Yeah.
So that gives them a bit of something to play with.
Yeah, so there's geography, right? Yugoslavia isn't right next door to the Soviet Union, so Tito's got a bit of a buffer zone between him and Stalin, which is a good thing.
They all like him.
Yeah, his people really like him, right? That helps out a lot. What else?
I think
What were you going to say, Aliana?
Can you just say that he literally does the opposite of what Stalin wants?
Yeah, he does not listen to anything Stalin says, right? So what happens? Tito and Bulgaria are going to get together and create some sort of economic,
the Federation, the Balkan Federation,
yeah, a little Balkan federation.
Stalin's pants get heavy, so he calls the Bulgarians and some other people to Moscow and tell them what to do.
Yeah, but so they're going to set up this little customs union or whatever, this little economic union in the Balkans. Stalin loses his marbles over it, summons them both to Moscow. The leader of Bulgaria goes. Tito sends like his secretary and some unimportant members of his government. He's like, oh yeah, go talk to this guy. So I'm sure that just enraged Stalin. Apparently, I don't think this is in the textbook. Apparently, I think there's a story, and I might get the details wrong, but I think at some point Stalin sends an assassin to kill Tito. That's on brand for Stalin, right? Apparently, Tito kills the assassin first, and then sends like a message back to Stalin and says, "Yeah, you're gonna have to send someone better next time." I could be wrong about that, but I remember hearing that story. Almost. He's like, yeah, send a real assassin next time. Come on. So anyway, Tito is, not afraid of Stalin. He's not going to do anything Stalin says. Yugoslavia is a little bit removed from the Soviet Union. All of his people love him, and so it's hard for Stalin to get anyone to overthrow him. And eventually, yeah, Stalin is just forced to say, ugh, forget it. Do whatever you want. You're out of Comic-Con. You're dead to me, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, they kicked him out of the comic firm. They did some political, any kind of pressure they could throw it all at him.
Mm-hmm. But then he just leaned over to the West, right?
Yeah, he took the Marshall stuff. And he pissed off Stalin even more when he backed up the Greek.
Right. So yeah, so Tito is not playing by Stalin's, he's not singing from Stalin's song sheet, as they say. And so yeah, Stalin is forced eventually just to kind of let him go his own way, right? Which again, I like. I get a little kick out of the fact that Tito kind of gave the middle finger to Stalin and got away with it. Whatever his other crimes might have been, you got to give it to him for that, Okay, Tito, and oh yeah, what is this NSC 68? What on earth is that thing?
National Security Council, they passed legislation, I think, number 68.
Um,
Which basically was aligned with the Truman Doctrine. It kind of made it practical, called for another rearmament, sending troops, something like that. I'm not really sure.
you're close, and maybe the textbook doesn't do the greatest job of explaining what this is, but NSC 68 is a policy paper, and so it's kind of drafted by the government. And what's a policy? How would you define a policy? Yes. Like a rule? Yeah, rules, guidelines, the way in which we do something, right? What's our approach to this? How do we go about doing this thing? What do we think about this or that? What are our plans? All of those things are kind of in a policy, right? And so here, this policy paper is kind of focused on what do the years ahead of the Cold War look like, and what should the United States do in order to be prepared? And so NSC 68 basically says that the Cold War started out a little bit, both sides were kind of testing each other, the Iran thing, the Turkey thing, the Berlin blockade thing. Everybody was kind of just, bumping into each other a little bit to test the limits. And then we had Korean War, right? And so the Korean War is where things actually get violent. There's fighting going on. Of course, the Americans are kind of, they're fighting a war in Korea, kind of against the communists, but not against the Soviet Union entirely. And so NSC 68 looks ahead and thinks, this is probably going to continue. And there's a possibility that things are going to escalate, right? That there might actually be more conflicts ahead. And so what should the United States do?
The United States should get itself some guns and strengthen its position in Europe, basically what they said. But the NSC 68 comes like a few months before the Korean War. Yeah, it comes after as a result of the Red Scare and the.
Oh, I thought it was after for some reason.
And it was the 12th of April 1950. The NSC came out, and 25th of June 1950 was North Korea.
Oh, okay. I got those inverted, hey?
What freaked out the Americans even more was a bit of a mushroom in the Soviets' hand.
Right. Right. So what happens in 1949? Yeah, the Soviets managed to successfully test their first atomic bomb, right? And I think, as the documentary mentioned the other day, several years ahead of where the Americans thought they were, right? So this is a bit of an oh poop moment for the U.S., right? And so, well, I don't want to swear on, I don't want to swear in my class here, but yeah, this is a oh, now we're in trouble, right? Because now the Soviets, the balance has been restored, right? For a while, the Americans had, as Truman says, they had the hammer, right? And so Stalin was kind of on, he was not on equal footing with the U.S., but now, of course, he is, right? So this NSC 68 thing says we're going to need to ramp up our military spending. We're going to need to be armed. We're going to need to have military forces all around the world, in Western Europe, as we'll soon see, in the South Pacific, all kinds of places, right? And so the U.S. kind of steps into this role as global policeman by arming themselves to a very significant degree, right? What do they say? They're spending 13% of their GNP.
Yep.
Wow.
Already $5 billion.
Wow. In 1950, or whenever that is, 1949. That's a lot of money, especially for, if you think about a country the size of the United States and a country that's actually as rich as the United States. So for them to spend 13% of their gross national product, that's a lot of military spending, right? And of course, that's going to continue as the years go on. They're going to continue to dump huge amounts of money, as they still do, into their military, right? And so, but again, this is kind of where it starts, right? Truman says we're going to intervene if anyone's trying to resist being overthrown by armed minorities, and this is the actual military end of it. We're going to arm ourselves to the teeth, basically, to make sure that we can counter any Soviet expansion wherever it might occur, right? So that's a lot of military spending. I'd be curious to know, I don't have the stats for Canada, but I'm sure we were spending like 0.5, or if that, because we have a small, tiny military that's very unimpressive,
You guys have a small population.
with no nuclear weapons. We have a lot of land to defend, though. We're a big country. What was that?
Small population.
Small population.
It's not true.
What's that?
It's not true.
It's not, well, it's true, right? We can't spend quite that amount of money with just a few people, right? Okay, so NSC 68 is a policy paper. It recommends that the U.S. government ramp up their military spending, arm themselves in order to resist Soviet expansion or any Soviet aggression that will come in the future, right? Which it does, and that's exactly, again, that's exactly what they do. Korean War, oh, there's 3 questions here. Do you want to take a little break before we come back to Korean War? Yeah, we've been working hard. Let's take a little break, come back in 10 minutes, and we'll talk about the Korean War question.
So this Khrushchev guy is the same Nikita guy?
Yeah, so after Stalin dies, Khrushchev will succeed him. Okay, people, we are back. We are back. Question number 16 has to do with the Korean War. Tell me, how does this Korean War thing? Well, what's the state of Korea after the Second World War? What is the state of Korea? As in the condition, not the state. What's
And the Korea was, yeah, they were divided into,
they're divided into two, right?
yeah, over the 30th parallel.
Right.
The northern ones were like communist stuff, and the southern ones were anti-communist.
Right.
They were ruled by two lovely-looking group of dictators, each dreaming about the unification of their country on their own chart. They would be in charge, and everyone else would follow them. They didn't go to war at first.
Right.
You know, Stalin didn't have the nuke, so he felt like, yeah, it's not really worth it. He got the nuke, he got his head a bit bigger, so we give Kimi the go-ahead to blow up the rest of the country. He goes there, the Americans don't like it, they pour in.
I'm going to pause you right there, just so I can relate what's happening to the online audience here. Right, so we've stated that Korea at the end of World War II is divided on the 38th parallel, right? So the Americans are in the south, the Soviets are in the north. Nobody really wants to leave and surrender the country to the other one, and so it kind of stays that way, right? And so we saw in the video yesterday that the Americans were supporting a guy named Syngman Rhee as the leader of South Korea. He's a bit of a jerk as far as I remember, but he doesn't like, he's anti-communist, so it's good enough for the Americans, right? In the north, we have Kim Il-sung, right, which is the father of Kim Jong-un, who is the current leader of North Korea. So Kim Jong-un's daddy there, Kim Il-sung, is a communist leader. He would like to take all of Korea for himself and turn it into a communist paradise. And so he talks to his two new best friends, Joseph Stalin, right, and Mao. And he gets their backing, he gets Stalin's technology, he gets Chinese troops, and they come later, but there's a promise, right, that they're behind him. And so he decides, Kim Il-sung decides to invade South Korea and try to bring it all under communist control, right? Of course, the Americans don't like this, and they have a bit of a problem, right? Because Truman just got finished saying, you know, that we're going to support free peoples against, you know, being overthrown by outside forces. And so here in South Korea, these free people are about to be subjugated by an outside armed force, right? So Truman just finishes saying this, and now it's like, oh gosh, okay, now we gotta support this. Truman was probably thinking about Europe, right? But now there's this thing going on in Korea, and you know, now they've got to back up what they said, right? They've talked the talk, now they have to walk the walk. And so here they go into South Korea to defend it from these communists invading to the north. How's that war go? If you remember from the video yesterday.
Initially, the Americans get kicked around.
Mm.
Then they kick around some first. Like they didn't push all the way up to the northern parts of North Korea. They're almost there to get China, to get to the Chinese border.
Yep.
When the Chinese pull right, and they kick them back all the way to like the 30th parallel again.
Yeah, so it goes back and forth a few times, right? So the Americans are in the south. The North Koreans push them all the way down, almost out of Korea. Then the Americans kind of go in the back door by Incheon. We saw that in the video. And they manage to push the North Koreans all the way almost out of Korea, right? Over the Yalu River into China. Then we get Chinese reinforcements pouring into North Korea. And then they push the Americans back down below the 38th parallel. And so things go kind of back and forth for a few times. And then eventually, what happens?
Patra gets kicked out, then they sign a treaty to end the war.
Right. So MacArthur actually wants to take the war into China, right? So this is the leader of the American forces during the Korean War, Douglas MacArthur. He says to Truman, I want to take the war to China. And Truman's like, whoa, whoa, this thing has gone far enough, right? And so he tells MacArthur to stop. MacArthur says, I don't like that very much. Truman says, that's okay. Go, yeah, go find work elsewhere. And so again, things kind of settle out at the 38th parallel yet again, right? So eventually they sign a ceasefire agreement between the two. And interestingly, that's the end of it. And so that ceasefire agreement from 1952 or 1953 is still in effect. So there's no peace treaty between North Korea and South Korea currently. They only have a ceasefire agreement. So in a way, they're still at war with each other. They're just not fighting it. But there's no peace treaty between them. So again, we have this unresolved, I guess, huh?
If the both countries have, you don't need a peace treaty.
Well,
You kind of still do
it would, yeah. You should formally conclude the war, right? You should formally say, we're not fighting anymore, it's over. We sign off on this, everything, we're all good. You know, you owe me this, or I owe you this, or we promise not to do anything like this again. Usually you have one of those, but these guys don't, because again, it never really got concluded. So they signed a ceasefire agreement to stop fighting, and that's kind of where it is, even up till today.
And they have the DMZ in the middle.
And they have a little strip, right? A little demilitarized zone, so at least they're not pointing their guns directly at each other all the time, right? How does this Korean War affect the foreign policy of the U.S.? How does it affect the policy of the U.S.? I think they become. I think the Korean War probably brings home the fact that yes, now there's fighting, and there will probably be more, right? So I think maybe at the beginning of the Cold War, nobody really knew what might happen, but now that a conflict has happened, they can maybe feel confident that more is going to follow, and it's true, more is going to follow. What about other organizations that they become involved with? What other organizations did the U.S. become involved with? There's ANZUS, right? ANZUS. What's ANZUS? Did you see it?
No, I didn't read this part.
Oh. So the U.S. enters into ANZUS, which is a kind of a military support alliance with Australia and New Zealand, right? So the U.S. is allied with those two countries in order to support them. What about CETO? What's CETO? Yeah, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, right? So similar to NATO, we have a bunch of Southeast Asian countries allied together in mutual defense against communist or Soviet aggression. And who's in it?
The United States, Britain, France, Australia, New Zealand, Pakistan, and the Republic of Philippines.
Okay.
USA, Britain, how are they in Southeast Asia?
Well, they're still there as a legacy of colonialism, right? So the British and the French have had a presence in Southeast Asia for centuries, and they still have interests there, right? Oh, and what about Japan? What do they do with Japan?
Japan is occupied.
Huh?
Japan is occupied by the Americans. So I don't know if they just bring in more troops.
Yeah, well, they rearm Japan, right? And they also, again, start to invest. Yeah, lots of capital, technology, money. They rearm Japan, and so Japan really gets a boost, right? So again, Japan was defeated in World War II in 1945, and about maybe 8 years later or so, the US is like, okay, we're worried about your ability to defend yourself from the Soviets, so we're going to get you back on your feet in a big way, right? And so again, Japan's going to benefit from this huge kind of economic investment and sort of investment in technology and science and armaments and all these things. So yeah, good for Japan, right?
They did consider a nuclear option in the Korean War.
They did consider?
I heard about it. Like even at some point, MacArthur tells Truman, nuke him.
Well, that's, you know, and that's something that I guess we haven't really talked about yet, but that's always the problem with a weapon like that, right? Because as soon as any weapon, you can think of it, even if you want to carry, not that you can in Canada, but in the US, even if you wanted to carry a handgun, which lots of people in the US do, as soon as you buy one, and if you put it in your pocket or strap it to your belt or whatever you do, as soon as you do that, suddenly the decision is always there about whether to use it or not, right? As soon as the weapon exists, the question is always, are we going to use it now? No? How about now? 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 No? Later? Now? You always have to ask yourself that question, right? And so, again, when I walk down the street in Canada, I never have to ask myself the question of whether I'm going to shoot someone because I don't have a gun, so I don't have to ask myself that question. But as soon as you strap on a gun, that question is always there, right? Am I going to use this to defend myself right now? And so again, it's the same thing with the Americans. Once they invent this atomic weapon, the question is always there, right? Should we nuke them? Should we just end this war right here, right? And tempting, right? It's always there. It's especially when you have supremacy and nobody else has this weapon. Very tempting, but
Then like was 1950 and Stalin had his hand up.
right. That changes the, as they say, it changes the calculus a little bit, right? It's one thing when you're the only one who has a nuclear weapon, but when the other guy has it too, that kind of changes your thoughts, right? Because if you drop yours, they might drop theirs too, right? And then you got a big problem, right? It's different when the other side won't retaliate, right? But when they will, different story. So the Americans start allying themselves with a bunch of other Southeast Asian countries. They're going to have an increased military presence in Southeast Asia that they thought they wouldn't have to have, but it turns out that they do. They start reinvesting in Japan and rearming Japan. How did that affect Europe? How did the Korean War affect Europe? What happened as a result there?
Do they arm Germany?
Say again?
Do they arm West Germany?
Yeah. So Japan is going to be rearmed, but also West Germany is going to be rearmed as well, right? And so prior to this point, the rearming of Germany was a little bit politically questionable, right? Because remember, people are still thinking about Nazis, right? Nazis were just 5 years ago. They're not gone from people's kind of collective conscience, right? And so people are still thinking about Germany as, a country of Nazis. And then, the question is, oh, should we rearm them? And a lot of people are like, oh no, don't do that. And so, but after the Korean War, it becomes clear that West Germany is going to need to be rearmed. And of course, I'm not suggesting that West Germany is full of Nazis. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it's still, those images and ideas are still in people's minds, right? So the idea of rearming West Germany is not what people want to do. But after the Korean War, it gets rearmed again, right? Because again, if the communists can flow over the 38th parallel into South Korea, what's to stop them from flowing into West Germany in the same way, right? Last thing. Oh yeah, how does the Korean War affect USSR? How does it affect USSR? What's that? Right. So you're saying Stalin sort of focuses more on consolidating his power in Eastern Europe rather than expanding? Yeah. Yeah. So Stalin faces a few setbacks here. He's unable to bring Yugoslavia to heel, as they say, right? Like a dog on a leash. He's unable to bring Yugoslavia to heel. He's supported Kim Il-sung in North Korea, but that didn't really pan out either. And so he's decided to sort of just consolidate his power in Eastern Europe for now, rather than expanding outward, right? So I guess both sides experience some failures here, right? So Stalin experiences some failures with that. But Truman does as well, and we saw that in the video yesterday, where the Korean War was not exactly a win for the U.S., right? It was more of a draw, right? So things kind of went back to exactly the way they were prior to the war, and so it wasn't a big victory for the U.S. They kind of, they had some success, and then they kind of got their butts kicked, and then they said, okay, time out. Let's stop fighting. And so that's not really a victory. And then the Soviets, there's news comes that the Soviets have developed an atomic weapon, and the U.S. no longer has, the hammer on the Soviet Union, so that's not encouraging. And then, which I think we've read about incidentally here, but then Mao's communists win in China, and China becomes a communist country, right? And so all of this is kind of attributed to Truman, and it starts to look really bad for him, right? And so people have a lot of confidence in him toward the early part of the 1950s, but as it moves on, it increasingly looks like the U.S. is losing the war with the Soviet Union, losing the competition with communism, and unfortunately, that's going to look bad for Harry Truman, and he's not going to get elected again. It's actually going to be Dwight Eisenhower, who is a military general from the Second World War. And again, often we'll see that in countries where when things look scary, or when things don't look good for your country, the country will usually try and elect the tough guy, right? That's who they want. And so again, if Canada found itself in a really dire situation, Justin Trudeau is not the guy they would elect, because Justin Trudeau is not the tough guy. He's the nice, soft, good-looking guy, right? So we like the good-looking guy when things are going okay, but when things start to go downhill, people will look for the tough guy.
And the member of parliament, the head of every state can change the president. Like,
Say that one more time.
someone want to change, the presidency, the prime minister, like, what do you call it?
Yeah, Prime Minister.
Yeah. So can they change the person? Or can they elect someone else?
In Canada, if you want to change your prime minister, there's basically two ways. So number one, you can have a general election, and you can vote, and it's basically the party with the most seats forms the government, and the leader of that party becomes the prime minister.
So who selects the leader?
The leader is selected by the party. So here in Canada, the Liberals have the most seats in Parliament. That means that they form the government. And Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party of Canada, elected Justin Trudeau as their leader. So if you don't like Justin Trudeau anymore, we can have an election, and we can vote in another party as government, so the Conservatives or the NDP or the Greens or the Bloc Québécois. And then the leader of that party will become prime minister. So if we vote in an NDP government, or if the NDP gets the most seats, Jagmeet Singh is the leader of that party, and he will become prime minister. The other way to change is that if he let's say Trudeau totally loses his marbles and tries to do something totally crazy, either the party can actually can vote him out as leader, so they can remove him as leader and make someone else the leader of the party, and then they become the prime minister. Or the House of Commons, where all the government sits and votes, they can have a non-confidence vote. And so someone can stand up and say, I have no confidence in this government anymore. I call a vote of non-confidence. And if that vote passes, what's that?
I thought the president can, kick out the prime minister if they want to.
No, well, we don't have a president. No. So in a country where you do have a president, maybe that can happen. I'm not sure, because some countries have both, right? So some countries have one or the other or both. We have just a prime minister because we kind of work on more of a British system. The Americans kind of have their own thing going on. But yeah, so if the vote of non-confidence passes, the government falls and an election is automatically triggered for the most part. So again, if Justin Trudeau loses his marbles, or if we decide that he's no good anymore, there's a few ways in which he can be removed. And actually, he can be removed pretty easily.
So like if no one has a problem, he can be president for a long time and president.
There's no limits on being prime minister in Canada, as far as I'm aware. So as long as your party is voted in with the most seats, and as long as the party continues to want you as their leader, yeah, you can be prime minister for a long time.
So Justin Trudeau needs to be elected in a province.
That's the other thing too. He needs to be elected in his riding, and so his riding is part of Montreal, I think, called Papineau. That's his riding. So he needs to actually hold a seat as well. It's the riding is how the sort of map of Canada is divided up in terms of election. So here, this is Vancouver, Mount Pleasant, and so all of these people here will vote and they'll elect one representative. And so the prime minister can't be someone who isn't elected and doesn't have a seat. So he needs to be elected in his own riding. If he's not, it's a little awkward.
How long has he been president for?
Prime Minister? He's been for 6 years, I think. Yeah.
Don't hold elections like every 4 years to elect a PM.
Yeah, we do. How long has it been? Has it been less than that?
I think like it's been like 2 years ago or maybe a year ago, but because I remember when I was doing my immigration stuff to come over here, and then they said, "Oh my God, like Trudeau's government is not exactly as in the majority as it used to be.
Mm.
It's gonna be a bit tough."
So we have had a second election, yeah. So we're in his, I guess, second term as prime minister.
I have another question. So can someone be, the leader of a two state at once? Or can someone be
2 states?
so like just BC and Ontario? Can someone be the leader of?
No, you can't be both.
Can
You can't be both. No. Online people, I'm going to say goodbye to you now because we're over time. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.